The Lives of the Saints by Father Alban Butler, August 21st, St. Sidonius Apollinaris, Gaius Solo Apollinarius. Sidonius, soldier, poet, statesman, knight of the court and bishop, was born in Lyon around the year 430. His father and grandfather, both named Apollinaris, had been prefects of the Praetorium. Sidonius had the best masters of arts and sciences and became one of the most celebrated poets and orators of his time, but he resigned the imperial crown 10 months into his reign and died on the road to Auvergne. His successor, Majorian, took the city of Lyon and threatened time. His letters show that he was always very devout, extraordinarily affectionate, kind, and compassionate. On the other hand, he was not an exaggerated censor, since he did not raise his voice against the iniquities of his time, as long as they were the affairs of his province. Desirous of the re-establishment of the empire, he wrote another Sidonius married Papianilla, by whom he had a son and 3 daughters. Papianilla was the daughter of Avido, who ascended the Roman imperial throne in 455. Sidonius wrote a panegyric in honor of his father-in-law, who thanked him by placing his statue among those of the poets in the Forum of Trajan. Salvian wrote inflammatory pages against the corruption of Gaul. Saint Avitus, of whom the least that can be said is that he was a weak man, there were the inhabitants of the region. Sidonius then emerged from obscurity to write a panegyric in his honor. The new emperor was assassinated in 461 by Ricimero the Goth, who ceded the imperial crown to Severus. This change forced Sidonius to leave the court and retire to Auvergne. 4 years into his reign, Severus was poisoned by Ricimerus. Anthemius was elected emperor in 467. St. Sidonius made a trip to Rome to settle certain matters of his province. Eager for the re-establishment of the empire, he wrote another brilliant panegyric. The weak emperors of that time were very sensitive to praise, and therefore Sidonius was appointed prefect of the city. But Anthemius did not correspond to the saint's hopes. As life became difficult for him in Rome, Sidonius returned to Gaul, where he had his wife and family and where his possessions were. Soon after, the church called Sidonius into her service. The Diocese of Arvinum, which from then on began to be called Clermont in Auvergne, became vacant, and the people and the prelates of the region elected St. Sidonius bishop. Indeed, in addition to his qualities of character and intelligence, the saint was the man best prepared to support the Gallo-Roman power against the Visigoths. Sidonius tried to withhold the body from the election, claiming his incapacity, but finally he had to give in. From that moment on, he renounced light poetry, which until then had been his great entertainment, and devoted himself entirely to the studies proper to his state. Even in his lay state, he already knew a little theology, so that he soon became an authority, and bishops came to consult him. But the saint was rather reserved, and, not wishing to make a decision in the difficulties of others, he used to advise them to turn to persons of greater authority, claiming that he could not constitute himself the teacher of those whose advice he himself was so much in need of. St. Lupo of Troyes, who always professed great affection and admiration for him, wrote him a letter on the occasion of his elevation to the Episcopate, in which he told him, among other things, "Henceforth you must not show the high office you occupy by external apparatus, but by profound humility of heart. You have been elevated above the others, but you must consider yourselves as the last of the Christians and inferior to all. Be ready to kiss the feet of those whom formerly you would have considered unworthy to sit at your table. Be henceforth the servant of all." St. Sidonius followed the advice. He ate frugally, fasted every 3rd day, and although he was of delicate constitution, he practiced penance excessively. He considered it his principal duty to instruct, encourage, and help the poor. In a time of famine, with the help of his brother-in-law Ecdicio, he supported from his income more than 4,000 Burgundians and strangers, whom misery had forced to emigrate from their lands. When the time of famine had passed, he took the necessary measures to enable them to return to their place of origin. He achieved such a reputation that, when the metropolitan see of Bourges became vacant in 472, the prelates assembled there left in his hands the choice of the new bishop, and St. Sidonius chose Simplicius. He used to say that the bishop should do, out of humility, what the monk and the penitent do out of profession. In this regard, he cited the case of Maximus, bishop of Toulouse, whom he had known when he was a rich knight. When he was appointed bishop, Maximus changed completely. His clothes, his attitude, and his conversation denoted piety and modesty. His hair was short and his beard long. In his house there were only rough chairs, ordinary curtains, a table without a tablecloth, and he ate vegetables more often than meat. The Visigoth king, Euric, who already dominated the southern provinces of France, threatened to besiege Clermont, and the holy bishop urged the people to confront him. He himself appointed his brother-in-law as chief of the defense and instituted a series of Rogation processions to implore God's mercy. In spite of everything, Clermont fell in 474. The previous attitude of St. Sidonius exposed him to the reprisals of the enemy, and he was effectively banished, for some time, to a fortress near Carcassonne. He had for neighbors 2 women of bad character who made so much noise that the saint could neither sleep nor read, and used to say, "I have never seen 2 chattering women more unruly, restless, and exaggerated." When he returned to his diocese, he continued to protect and help his flock, despite the annoying opposition of the Goths. He died in 479, or perhaps 10 years later. Saint Sidonius Apollinaris was one of the main writers of the beginning of the second era of Christian literature, and the last of the authors of the Gallo-Roman school. His poems are redundant and ponderous. Instead, his letters are a historical testimony about the life of the knights of southern Gaul at the time of the disintegration of the empire, who liked sport, literature, and the fine arts, and their Christianity was somewhat superficial but sincere. In his years as a gentilhombre in Auvergne, the saint shared with his peers physical and intellectual amusements, managed his possessions, was concerned for the material and moral well-being of his slaves, and for the education of his own children. Thus, for example, in a letter he advises his son to beware of evil tongues, states that he has forbidden his household to go to the theater, and declined an invitation to go fishing because his daughter Severiana had a cold. At first glance, we may be surprised to find the name of Sidonius Apollinaris in the Roman Martyrology, but, according to the explanation of Fonder van Custom, he is one of so many bishops who attained the honor of the altars simply because they left no bad memory, and because their name figured in the annual commemoration of the Depositio Episcoporum,